Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Annie, Paloma, Julia, and Madeline. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip. No subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue with a book that one might say is very appropriate for April 1st. Practical Mind Reading, a course of lessons on thought transference, telepathy, mental currents, mental rapport, etc., containing practical instruction, exercises, directions, etc., capable of being understood, mastered, and demonstrated by any person of average intelligence. By William Walker Atkinson. Copyright 1908 by Advanced Thought Publishing Company, 168 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Let's pick up right where we left off in Chapter 5, Simple Demonstrations. Let's begin. About transmitters. 1. If your transmitter does not do his work properly, and you feel that he is not concentrating properly or using his will effectively, do not hesitate to change him. You need not offend him, for you may say simply that the rapport conditions are not fully developed between you, and that these things sometimes happen, etc. Your new transmitter will feel anxious to do better than his predecessor, and will be most likely to concentrate and will to the best of his ability. 2. The transmitter should be in earnest, and no levity or trifling should be permitted. If you have the selection, pick out some earnest person, and avoid the trifling, feather-brained class. 3. If your transmitter does not seem to be concentrating properly, you should speak to him firmly but kindly about it. Say to him, "Please concentrate your mind and will earnestly. Fix your mind on the right spot. Make a determined mental effort that I move in the right direction. It is your mind and will that gives me the impression, remember. It all depends upon you," etc. This will often have the effect of bracing him up to renewed mental activity, and you will notice the improvement at once. A word of warning. Beginning your entertainment, caution the audience about placing the hidden objects in places that you cannot conveniently touch, such as high up on the wall, under the strings of a piano, etc. Tell them that you can find the article anywhere, but it must be placed so that you can get at it with only ordinary care and work. Some smart Alecs may try to play pranks on you in this way, but discourage same vigorously at the start, informing the audience that this is a scientific test and not a circus. Tell them that the article must never be hidden about the transmitter, for the reason that he is seldom able to think as intently about his own location as about some place away from him. These are the only restrictions that you need make. Caution the transmitter to guide you away from obstacles over which you might stumble or which you might overturn. Tell him that you place yourself in his hands for protection, and then endeavor to think no more about the matter, for such thought tends to distract your passivity. The above feats or demonstrations are all performed along the same general lines as indicated a little further back, and all are capable of being accomplished by anyone of ordinary intelligence with a little study, care, and practice. Practice makes perfect, in mind reading as in everything else, so keep at it until you have worn off the rough edges and have polished up the details of the work. You may vary, improve, add to the above feats, and may also insert many new ones for yourself as you proceed with your work. Use your inventive faculties. The wire contact. A sensational and effective method of performing some of the simpler feats is performed by some public performers, and consists in having a piece of thick wire, about 1 foot in length, grasped by the receiver's left hand and by the transmitter's right hand, instead of the ordinary contact. A little practice will surprise you in the facility in which the impressions are transferred over the wire from the transmitter to the receiver. The methods of operation in this case are identical with those employed in the ordinary methods. A wooden ruler may be substituted for the wire. Some performers succeed even with a long walking cane. Third person interposed. Another variation is that in which a third person is interposed between the transmitter and receiver. Practice along these lines will enable the skilled mind reader to receive the impressions as usual, notwithstanding the interposition of the third person. Do not attempt to try these variations until you have thoroughly mastered the ordinary methods. The student is here advised to turn to the conclusion of Lesson 6 of this book and acquaint himself with the simpler method there described. It may help him in this phase of his work. We shall now pass on to the consideration of some of the more complicated or difficult feats of contact mind reading. Lesson 6. Difficult Demonstrations. We shall now direct your attention to a class of demonstrations of a rather more complicated order than those related in the last chapter. But even these difficult feats may be rendered comparatively easy of accomplishment by careful practice and development of receptivity. Preliminaries. In these experiments or demonstrations, the transmitter stands by your left side, you grasping the fingers of his right hand in your left hand, and holding, as in the case of the former experiments, i.e., either with his hand pressed against your head or else held out and up as before described. You receive the impressions in the same way. The following demonstrations may be performed after a little private practice, so as to be shown at a public performance almost as easily as the simpler feats heretofore described. Discovering the card. Demonstration 1. Spread a number of cards over the table. Then, retiring from the room, have the audience select one card of the number which the transmitter must be sure to remember distinctly. That is, the transmitter should remember just where the card is, the position being the important feature, rather than the name of the card. Then, taking the transmitter's hand as above described, you should move your right hand to and fro over the table, moving it backward and forward, and in circles. You will soon find that this feat closely resembles the one in the last chapter, in which you find small objects, the pinhole, etc. You will soon find that the impressions tend to center over a certain spot on the table. Begin to lessen your circles and hand movements until you gradually center over this spot. Then slowly lower your fingers until you touch the card resting on the said spot, when you will be sure that you are right, when you must pick up the card and exhibit it to the audience. The same indications mentioned in the feats of the last chapter will be felt by you. You will feel the no impression when you are wrong, and the that's right impression when you are moving in the right direction, until at last you will distinctly feel the relaxation of the mental urge, which you will have learned to translate into right you are when you finally touch the right card. This feat is really no more difficult than the one in which the small object is found, and we have included it in the list of difficult demonstrations simply because it is practically a connecting link between the two classes of demonstration, as you will see as we proceed. The checker move. Demonstration 2. This is akin to the last experiment. Have a checkerboard arranged by some of the audience who understands the game. Then let someone decide on the next move. Be sure that the transmitter thoroughly understands the piece to be moved, as well as the place to where it is to be moved. Then, proceeding as above indicated, first find the piece to be moved, and then move it to the proper place. This feat consists of 2 parts, you will notice. The finding of the piece is like the finding of the card. Then, with the piece grasped between your thumb and forefinger, make a small circular and backward and forward movement until you feel the mental impression of there when you will place your piece directly on the spot. This may seem difficult and appears so to the audience, but you will find by a little private practice that it is really as easily performed as some of the simpler tests. The Game of Cards, Demonstration 3. Similar to the above is the feat known as the Game of Cards. 2 players sit opposite each other at a table, having dealt themselves 2 hands of euchre. Have the transmitter lead you behind the first player, and standing there, have the player silently point out the card he wishes to lead to the transmitter. The transmitter then should concentrate his mind on the card, and you will find it in the usual manner, and having found it, will play it on the table. Then, leading you around to the other player, the transmitter repeats the process, and you find and play the card. Then back to the first play, and repeat. Then alternate between the players in the same manner until you have played out the game. This may be improved upon by the transmitter thinking of which player has won the trick, when you will push the cards over to the winner, having discovered the direction in the usual manner. This feat is very effective indeed when properly performed. The Mapped Out Trip. Demonstration 4. Have a map laid open on the table, and have the audience decide upon a trip between 2 points, either by rail or by water. Then returning to the room, stand as above described, and with your forefinger find the place from which the trip starts. Then move slowly along the selected course in the same manner in which the checker game was played, passing along the chosen route until the end is reached. These feats are all really variations of the one principle. The Pack of Cards. Demonstration 5. This is a very effective feat and requires some little skill and practice, but there is no reason why any careful, patient, and persistent student should not be able to master it. It consists in the audience selecting any given card from the pack and then replacing it with the others, being sure that the transmitter is familiar with the card chosen and knows enough about cards to recognize it when he sees it again. Then the pack of cards should be placed on the table face up. Returning to the room, you take the transmitter's hand as usual, and with your right hand, pick off the cards from the pack slowly and one by one. As you pick up each card, slowly weigh it in your hand, so to speak, and then place it aside if you receive no stop orders from the mind of the transmitter. Having previously practiced this feat in private, you will have learned that peculiar, heavier sensation that comes to you when you lift the right card from the pack, so that when you finally reach it, you will know it. We cannot describe just what this sensation will feel like. You must learn it by actually experiencing it in private practice. We advise you to diligently practice this feat in private, for it is wonderfully effective. You will find that after a bit of practice, you will be able to get the heavy feeling when you lift up and weigh the right card. You should perform this feat slowly and carefully, shaking your head no just before you discard a card. If by the lack of concentration of the transmitter you fail to feel the heavy feeling when you pick up the right card, the shake of the head will be apt to arouse him to exert his will more actively, and you will receive the hold-on impulse immediately. Do not be in too much of a hurry to discard, but make several feints at it before finally letting go. This feat may be improved by having the audience select a poker hand, such as a flush, a straight, three of a kind, a full house, etc., etc., and having you find the hand one card at a time. This latter is a fine effect and always brings down the house, but be sure that your transmitter really knows and remembers the cards, else the feat will fail, of course. He must remember each card and recognize it when it appears face up on the pack before you as you proceed with the discarding. Never attempt this feat in public without previous careful, private practice, for it requires the most delicate perception and skill. If you find that you cannot master it to your satisfaction after sufficient practice, you may try it by the simpler method given at the conclusion of this lesson. The chosen word in the book. Demonstration 6. Like the last feat, this is a complex and difficult one, but one that always arouses enthusiasm in an audience when well performed. It will repay you for the private practice that you will have to employ upon it before you produce it in public. The feat consists of the audience selecting a book from a pile or a bookshelf or bookcase, etc. Then a given page is chosen, then a line of printed matter on that page, and then a word in that line. it is well to have the transmitter draw a pencil circle around the chosen word so that he may be sure to remember it later. The book is then replaced on the shelf. Then returning to the room, you first find the book by the methods already given in previous feeds. Then laying it flat on the table, you should begin to slowly and deliberately pick each leaf up separately. This part of the feat is almost identical with the last one, in which you picked up the cards from the pack. When you get the proper impression, you should announce that you have found the leaf. If satisfied that you are right, ascertain upon which side of the leaf the chosen page is. This can be done by pressing the leaf to the right or left in succession until you get the right impression as to which way to press it down. Then, having thus found the page, pass your finger slowly down and back over the page several times until you get the impression of a center. This center will be the chosen line. Then, by passing the finger slowly along the line, you will discover the word when you reach it. This is a ticklish feat, but it may be mastered by practice. In fact, some people have found it almost as simple as some of the easier feats, while others require careful practice with it. Do not be discouraged if you do not succeed at first trial, even in public, but try again, and after a bit you will seem to get the knack all at once, and thereafter will have but little trouble in making the demonstration. If you find that you do not meet with the desired degree of success in this feat, try it by the simpler method given at the last of this part of the book, but do not give it up without the proper practice. If you have carefully performed the previous feats, you should have so developed yourself by this time that you should have no special difficulty in this feat. Blackboard demonstrations. The following feats may be performed either upon a large blackboard hanging from the wall or upon a large sheet of cardboard or stiff paper spread upon the table. If the blackboard is used, you should stand before it, the transmitter standing in the usual position. If the table is used, you should stand before it, the transmitter in his usual place. Drawing the chosen figure, Demonstration 7. Have the audience select a number and think intently of it. Impress upon the transmitter that he is to think of the shape of the figure instead of merely remembering its name. For instance, if the figure 8 is thought of, the transmitter should think of the shape of the figure and not of the word 8. Then begin to circle your hand around over the blackboard, just as you did when finding the place of the beginning of the trip of the demonstration mentioned a few minutes ago. Then bring your pencil or chalk to a starting point, which you will soon perceive. Then hold your fingers pressing lightly forward and impart to your hand a trembling, vibratory motion, as if in hesitation regarding the next movement, saying at the same time to your transmitter, "Will hard now, will the direction to me," and you will soon begin to get an impression of right or left or down, as the case may be, which you should follow slowly. Be slow about it, for if the impression is not right, you will soon be checked up. Fence around a little until you begin to get the impressions clearly. You will find that the principal trouble is at the start, for once you are started on the right track, your transmitter's will be freely employed, and he will pour the impressions into you. Let him feel that it is his will that is really doing the work, and he will exert it freely. Once started, these drawing feats are easily performed, the trouble being with the start. You should practice this feat frequently in private before attempting it in a public demonstration. It is very effective. The Lady's Age, Demonstration 8. This is a variation of the above feat. A lady in the audience is asked to whisper her age in the ear of the transmitter, and you are to draw it on the board or paper. The feat is performed precisely in the manner described above, the transmitter being cautioned to think of but one figure at a time during the drawing. The Banknote Test, Demonstration 9. Akin to the last two feats is the reading of the number of a banknote held in the hand of the transmitter. It is performed in precisely the same manner as the preceding feat. Be sure to have the transmitter understand that he is to think of but one figure at a time until it is drawn, and then the next, and so on. The Watch Number Test, Demonstration 10. The feat of reading and drawing the number of a person's watch is a variation of the last mentioned demonstration and is performed in precisely the same way. The Geometrical Figure Test, Demonstration 11. Have the audience select some simple geometrical figure such as a square, triangle, circle, right angle, etc., and proceed to draw it in the same way as the figures in the demonstrations just described. Have the transmitter hold the figure in his mind and mentally draw it as you proceed. A little private practice will enable you to draw these figures easily, and in fact they are really simpler than numbers, although more startlingly effective at times. Drawing Pictures, Demonstration 12. The same principle described in the above-mentioned test may be extended to apply to the drawing of simple pictures, such as the outline figure of a pig, etc. The copy is placed on the table or blackboard so that the transmitter may easily refer to it, and then you proceed as in the feats above mentioned. Practice this until you get it down fine. The Hidden Name, Demonstration 13. The same principle may be extended to the writing down of the name of a person, town, etc., previously chosen by the audience. Draw in large letters so that the eye of the transmitter may easily follow you at each step. The Underlying Rule. In all of the drawing demonstrations, you should remember the primary principle, that is, follow the line of the least mental resistance, and the will of the transmitter will invariably lead you to the right direction. The Simpler Method. A simpler method of performing the feats and demonstrations, which we have styled the more difficult feats, is that of having the transmitter stand by your right side, turning toward you and placing his right hand over yours, the tips of his fingers resting on your fingers between your large knuckles and first joints, instead of standing on your left side with his fingers grasped in your left hand as heretofore mentioned. This method is not nearly so good so far as appearances go, for some critical members of the audience might object that he was in confederacy with you and really helping you to draw, but it is highly effective so far as simplifying the feat is concerned. His fingertips with their nervous matter aroused into activity seem to fairly charge your fingers with nervous energy or magnetism, and your hand acts almost automatically. The motion of the receiver's hand and fingers under this method becomes almost like the motion of a planchette, and often writes and draws the numbers, figures, letters, etc. so easily and smoothly that they seem to be fairly running away from the mind of the performer. You should at least familiarize yourself with this method so as to be able to use it in emergencies, or in the case of a poor transmitter, or else in the case of the more delicate and complex tests. If you neglect this method, you will have failed to acquaint yourself with one of the most startling features of contact mind reading, which so far touches the higher phenomena that it is closely akin to what is known as automatic writing. In fact, if you are disposed and are naturally receptive and sensitive to impressions, you may even write a letter through the will of a good transmitter by this method. By all means, make yourself acquainted with its possibilities and phenomena. We now pass on to a consideration of the more sensational feats. Lesson 7. Sensational Feats. In addition to the feats given in this work, which together with their countless variations form the stock in trade of the majority of the professional mind readers, there are a number of other feats essayed by the public performers, which we have seen fit to group under the general title Sensational Feats. These feats are described here in order that the student may understand the nature of them and the manner of their performance, but we consider such feats suitable only for the sensational advertisements of the professional performers, and always dependent upon more or less spectacular accessories, and attended by even dangerous features in the case of the driving feat, and therefore we do not offer them for reproduction by the private student or the parlor demonstrator. The principal sensational feats performed by the professionals are as follows. The driving feat. This is performed by the performer, blindfolded as usual, driving a team along the public streets to some selected point, which point is usually a hotel previously selected by a public committee. Upon reaching the hotel, the performer goes to the hotel register, turns the pages, and finds a name previously selected. The performer receives his impressions from members of the committee, who are seated beside him on the carriage seat, with their arms on his shoulders, or having hold of his hands, or even connected with him by wire. The feat is really a spectacular reproduction of the familiar feats described in previous chapters, and the principles governing it are precisely the same. The transmitters impress the direction upon him, and he follows the line of the least mental resistance. The combination lock feat. This feat is employed either separately or in connection with the driving feat. It consists in the performer opening the combination safe of a hotel or some business establishment. In this case, the transmitter must know the combination perfectly, and his mental impressions acting upon the performer give him the cue to turn right or left or repeat, as the case may be. Of course, one must have cultivated a great degree of sensitiveness to mental impressions before he will be able to receive and respond to the direction impressions in this case. And yet, almost any person, by following the directions given in this work and carefully and repeatedly practicing the various feats and demonstrations given herein, may be able to reproduce this feat of the professional performer, who is in constant daily practice, and who is able to devote his entire time to the work, as his bread and butter is concerned therein. Once the sensitiveness is gained, the details of the work are nothing more than those employed in any of the finding or drawing feats herein described and explained. The Office Detective Feat. In this feat, the public committee picks out an object on the desk or about the office of some one of its members, the office being located some distance from the place of meeting. The performer then rushes along the public streets, dragging the transmitter with him until the office is reached, then upstairs and into the room selected, and up to the desk or other place, and lo, the object is found. Divesting this feat of all its sensational features, the student will see that it is merely a variation of the ordinary finding feat performed in the parlor. It creates a great sensation, but there is nothing more wonderful about it than about the simplest finding feat. The Post Office Feat. Another feat favored by some of the professional performers is that of having a letter placed in a post office lockbox, the key of which is given the performer at a point some distance from the post office. Rushing through the public streets, dragging the transmitter with him, the performer finds the post office in the usual way, and then locates the lockbox, into which he inserts the key and extracts the letter, thus triumphantly completing the feat. This feat, as every student will see, is merely a variation of the simpler feats, manifested in a sensational manner for the purpose of public advertisement. The Fire Alarm Feat. This feat is another free advertisement demonstration, in which the performer, with the permission of the city officials, discovers the location of a certain fire alarm box and turns on the alarm with the key which had been previously loaned him. Some public officials allow this test to be performed, using it as a test alarm for the department as well, and the sight and sound of the clanging fire engines, the smoke, and confusion following upon the sensational mind-reading demonstration is calculated to cause great excitement and interest in the town, which usually results in packed houses at the night's entertainment. But the test is really nothing but a variation of the simple finding the spot demonstration, with sensational accompaniments. Variations. We might enlarge our list of sensational feats, but to no real benefit to the student, for they are all cut from the same cloth, and are but improvements upon the simple parlor feats. If the student wishes to do so, he may invent a dozen similar feats, just as sensational and just as effective. The purpose of the sensational feat is primarily to gain free advertisements for the public performers. As scientific demonstrations, they have but very slight value. Fake demonstrations exposed. In concluding this part of the book, we wish to warn our students against some of the so-called mind readers who are traveling around the country giving exhibitions of so-called mind reading, which, while interesting enough in themselves, are nothing but cleverly devised devices intended to counterfeit the genuine phenomena. The majority of these performers have a series of cleverly arranged signal codes by which the confederate conveys to the mind reader the name and description of the article handed to the former by some one of the audience. One of the principal performers in this line in this country had a signal code of over 5,000 objects, which he and his confederate had carefully memorized. This code was worked by the plan of asking the blindfolded mind reader to name the object. You can see the possibilities of this when you remember the many different ways in which the same question may be asked, and when you remember that each word and combination of words conveys a distinct and separate meaning to the blindfolded one. Others employ sleight of hand and legerdemain in order to produce the illusion. Prepared pads of paper upon which questions are written and similar means are commonly used in such exhibitions. We do not purpose going into this matter in detail, for such is not the purpose of this work. But we think it well to call the attention of our students to the same, in order that they may get a clue to some of the various counterfeit exhibitions of mind reading, which are being advertised by some of the public performers. There are other public performers, however, who give fine exhibitions of the genuine phenomena. The student of this work should have acquired a sufficient knowledge of its underlying principles to enable him to distinguish between the genuine and the spurious when he sees an exhibition. If any wish to know more of the counterfeit, there are many good works published on legerdemain which will satisfy his curiosity. Lesson 8. Higher Phenomena. In the demonstrations described and explained in the previous parts of this work, the mental impressions travel from one mind to another over the channels of the telegraphic wires of the nervous system of the transmitter and receiver. In other words, the mind reading that is employed in the feats and demonstrations given is akin to the ordinary telegraphic current traveling over the wires from sending station to receiving station, the nervous system of the two persons furnishing a very close counterpart to the telegraphic wire, etc. But there is a step beyond this, many steps in fact. While the contact mind reading which we have described and explained is surely wonderful enough to attract the attention of all thinking minds, still, when the advanced student passes on to the field of the higher phenomena, he is destined to meet with marvelous results, which in some cases almost surpass belief. This higher phenomena of mind reading, or telepathic mind reading, when compared to the contact mind reading, is as the wireless telegraph when compared to the ordinary telegraph using wires. In Lesson 1 of this book, we have given you the theories held by scientific men regarding the nature of the waves or currents that proceed from one mind to another and the mechanism by which these waves are registered. We think it will be interesting to many of you to know that certain occultists have their own theory regarding this matter, which, while not widely known, is still of the greatest interest to earnest students of the scientific side of the subject. We allude to what is known as the pineal gland theory. The pineal gland is a small gland, cone-shaped and of a reddish-gray color, situated in the brain about the middle of the skull, nearly above the top of the spinal column. It is a compact mass of nervous matter containing a quantity of what has been called brain sand, which is composed of very small particles of gritty matter. The anatomists and physiologists confess their ignorance of the function and purpose of the pineal gland, and it remains for the occultists to explain its real nature, which is the receiving and registering of the waves or currents or vibrations of thought and will received from another person. This pineal gland is, according to the occultists, the receiving instrument for the wireless mind reading and in fact it resembles the actual receiver of the wireless telegraph in more than one respect. The first steps. In the first place, the student who is practicing the experiments given in previous chapters and who is making the demonstrations given there will find that at times he is able to do away with the physical contact. He will loosen his hold upon the hand of the transmitter and at times will sever the contact entirely. And after the feat is demonstrated, he will realize to his astonishment that he has performed the principal part of the feat without contact at all. He may be almost unconscious of this fact, for the reason that he was so much immersed and absorbed in his work that he did not have time to think of these details. At other times, he will find that even before he has made the physical contact with the transmitter, he will receive a flash of mental impression which will enable him to proceed to the selected location or object at once. Demonstrations without a transmitter. These experiences will become so frequent and so strong that he may often, in the cases of peculiarly sensitive people, perform the entire feat without the physical contact of the transmitter, and perhaps without any transmitter at all. In well-developed cases, the receiver may perform the simple feats, and sometimes some of the more complicated ones, merely by the aid of the concentrated will of the audience. We have known of cases in which a pocket knife was the selected and hidden object, and when the demonstrator would enter the room, he would receive a sudden mental impression of the word knife, followed by the impression under the sofa pillow, etc., and upon going to the designated spot, the knife would be found. Every person who carefully practices the demonstrations given in this book will be able to add actual experiences of this kind of his own, which have been experienced by him during the course of his work. In order to develop the ability to produce the higher phenomena, the best course is for the student to frequently practice the demonstration and experiments of contact mind reading, as this will develop the receptive faculties of the mind. Then the student may occasionally practice with a few sympathetic and harmonious friends, endeavoring to reproduce the demonstrations without physical contact. Exercises for development. He may also try the experiment of having a friend hold a certain number of small buttons, etc. in his hand, and endeavor to will that the student shall guess the right number. Some people attain a surprising proficiency in this work, almost from the first. A similar experiment with the pack of cards, the student endeavoring to guess the card drawn from the pack, naming color, suit, and number in turn, may afford successful results. A number of these experiments may be thought of by an ingenious person, remembering always that the guess is not a guess at all, but an attempt to register the mental impression of the transmitter. Reproducing the Sperry feats. The student may with great profit endeavor to reproduce the experiments of the Sperry children related in Lesson 2 of this work, in our account of the experiments of the Society for Psychical Research. The Willing Game. The well-known Willing Game will afford you an opportunity to develop this faculty of wireless mind reading. Your audience is seated in the room, and you enter blindfolded. An object has been previously selected. You stand in the center of the room, and the audience wills to the right, then forward, then a little lower down, etc., etc., until the object is found, just as was the case when the transmitter sends the impressions. The audience should will only one step at a time, and you should take that one step without thought of the succeeding ones. The mind should be held as receptive as possible, that is, open to vibrations. Take your time, and do not let hurry or anxiety enter your mind. It will be well to practice this experiment with members of your family or with harmonious and sympathetic friends. Long-distance experiments. Experiments of wireless mind reading or telepathy may be tried between friends at long distances, space apparently presenting no obstacle to the passage of the thought waves. Pick out some friend with whom you have established a strong rapport condition by means of his having acted as your transmitter in your contact mind reading experiments, and by having practiced rhythmic breathing as heretofore described. Have the transmitter sit in his room at the appointed time, gazing intently at some small, simple object, such as a knife, a glass, a cup, a book, etc., and endeavoring to make a clear mental picture of it, which picture he should also will to be reproduced in your mind. Remember, he should think of the looks or appearance of the object, not merely of its name. He should think of the shape, etc. of the book, instead of thinking the word book. At the same time, you should sit quietly in your room, placing yourself in the same passive, receptive mental attitude that you have acquired and practiced in your contact mind readings. Then wait patiently for impressions. After a while, if successful, you will get the mental picture of a book or whatever object was thought of by the transmitter. This experiment may be varied from time to time, the principle being the same in all cases. It will be well for both the transmitter and the receiver to keep a written record of the time of each experiment and the objects thought of. Several objects may be thought of at a sitting of, say, 5 minutes apart, a careful record being kept by both parties of the time and object, so that a later comparison may show the results of the experiments. In case of the two people being in different cities, they may mail each other copies of their record for comparison. The automatic writing experiments. Another way of conducting experiments along the lines of the higher phenomena of mind reading is akin to the automatic writing known to all students of occultism. The transmitter concentrates his thought and will in the usual manner, while the receiver places himself in the usual receptive, passive state of mind and awaits the impressions. But instead of the receiver merely sitting as usual, he draws his chair to a table, having a soft pencil in his hand and a pad of paper on the table before him. He holds the pencil lightly between his fingers, with its point touching the paper, and then awaits impressions. Under good conditions, after waiting a time, the pencil will begin to twitch and move feebly. The hands and fingers should allow it full and free motion. After a few moments of indecision, the pencil will often begin to write out words. In many experiments, the word or object thought of by the transmitter will be written out or drawn in full by the hand of the receiver, acting automatically. Some experiments succeed much better with this plan than with the more common method. The Stead experiments. Mr. W.T. Stead, the well-known London editor and investigator of psychic phenomena, discovered this method while he was experimenting along the lines of automatic writing from disembodied souls. He found that he was really coming in contact with the thought waves emanating from the minds of the living instead of the dead. He persisted in his experiments along these lines, and after a time was able to write out full letters embodying the thoughts in the minds of persons of his acquaintance and others. Other investigators have reproduced his experiments with marvelous results. There is a great field here awaiting investigation, and it may be that some of the students of this work are destined to add to the scientific testimony on the subject. The above simple directions are all that are necessary in order to conduct this scientific experiment. Rapport conditions. There is a great difference in the degrees of rapport existing between different people, and as the degree of success depends upon the degree of rapport, it is of the greatest importance that you find some person with whom you are in harmonious vibration in order to try these experiments in the higher phenomena. We will not burden the student with recitals of experiments to perform in this higher phenomena demonstration. He may readily devise experiments for himself from the examples given in connection with the contact mind reading. The transmitter may think of a card, an object, a name, a place, a scene, a thought, a feeling, etc., etc., without limit, and it makes no difference in the nature of the experiment or test, whether it be tried at long range or in the same room without contact. The feat is the same. The principle is the same. The Blackburn-Smith experiments. As a further suggestion to the student, we would refer him to Lesson 2 of this work, to the report of the experiments with Mr. Smith and Mr. Blackburn. If you will carefully read this report again, you will find a wealth of suggestions regarding the forms of demonstrations. But bless your hearts, the experiments may be varied without end. The principle is the same in each case. The underlying principle is that the transmitter thinks intently upon the appearance of the object or thing, or else upon the feeling connected with it, if it be a feeling instead of an object, and the receiver endeavors to receive the impression. The transmitter manifests an active will to transmit the mental image, while the receiver assumes a passive receptive desire to receive the impression. The one is all will, the other is all desire. Concluding this chapter on the higher phenomena of mind reading, we would say to the students that very few of them will have the perseverance to continue their experiments beyond the point of contact mind reading, or perhaps the simplest forms of the higher phenomena. Contact mind reading is far more satisfactory to the average person, for its results are very constant indeed, and comparatively little labor, time, and trouble are necessary to make the demonstrations, while on the contrary, the results of the demonstrations of the higher phenomena are less constant, except in the cases of very highly developed receivers, working with transmitters in almost perfect rapport and harmony. Then, the average experiments along the lines of the higher phenomena some days will prove highly successful, while other days will be almost barren of result. In fact, there seems to be a sort of spontaneous action in the production of the higher phenomena, and the degree of success depends more or less upon some conditions of the mental world not as yet fully understood by science. But to those who wish to push into the unknown as far as they may do so, this field of the higher phenomena of mind reading offers a fascination and attraction difficult to express, to those who have not experienced it. Advertisement: Practical Psychomancy and Crystal Gazing by William Walker Atkinson. A series of 11 lessons on the psychic phenomena of distant seeing, clairvoyance, psychometry, crystal gazing, etc. Partial synopsis of contents. Scientific principles underlying psychomancy. Sensing objects by the astral senses. Projection of the astral body. How to develop yourself. Development methods. Concentration. Visualization. Psychometry. How to use the crystal and mirror. General instruction. Simple and space psychomancy and their difference. Seeing through solid objects. Seeing down into the earth. Diagnosis of disease by psychomancy. The astral tube. Psychometry, 5 methods. Various forms of crystal gazing. Directions of how to do it, etc. Astral projection, what the trained experimenter may do. Space psychomancy, what may be accomplished by means of it. Sensing the scenes, occurrences, and objects of the past by astral vision. Future time psychomancy. Dream psychomancy. This lesson will explain many instances in your own experience. This most interesting study is stated clearly so that all may readily understand the fundamental principle of psychic communication. Price, cloth binding, 50 cents. And with that tantalizing description of the sequel, we have reached the end of Practical Mind Reading by William Walker Atkinson. And wasn't that something? I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, instead of trying to contact me psychically, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.